Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to That Trippi Show with my co-host Alex Sashlow. This week, we're rejoined by a special guest, our friend Trygve Olsen. Trygve and I were having such a good time on the Lincoln Square strategy session this week. I thought we'd continue the conversation right here. Trygve, welcome back, my friend.
Thank you, Joe. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys. And it was fun on the Lincoln Square podcast because you and I got going about some of our international experiences, which is always good. And Alex is at an undisclosed location, so there's that outside the country.
Yeah, that's true. So, Alex, with that introduction, where do you want to get started, my friend?
Oh, man. Yeah, well, catch our listeners up on some of the highlights from Tuesday night. I think a lot of people would want to hear about it. Trygve, I know your stories are always pretty good.
You know, one of the things that was fun about that, I thought was, and I think our listeners, your listeners, you know, Joe and I got talking about Elon Musk, and Elon was back at it yesterday, and about the reality is in the game that we're in, in the usual game of democracy politics, right? Elon Musk switching sides is probably not something where people would be on the left would be like, oh, well, Elon is an ally for the moment, right? But in the game that we're in, and this is what Joe and I got talking about, the strange part about the democracy versus autocracy thing, right now, Elon Musk is an ally, which it kind of gets back to what I call the Stalin Rule, that, you know, Churchill and Roosevelt fully understood that Joseph Stalin was the second worst human being to ever live, probably. But they were going up against the worst human being who ever lived, and hence he was an ally of convenience. What's crazy for the pro-democracy people is right now, on some level, Elon Musk is in fact an ally of convenience, because what he's doing is he's opening up some space for people on the pro-democracy side to be approaching some of the Trump MAGA people with the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, he's fracturing up. He's creating a little schism that we can take advantage of, and that's why he's the enemy of your enemy is your friend kind of thing for a little bit here. Maybe for the whole, well, we'll see where it goes from here. But yeah, I agree with you, Trig. But what I think it's like, you know, for our listeners, the thing about Trygve and Alex and I is how we occasionally have found ourselves overseas, Ukraine and other places, Zimbabwe, just in all kinds of weird, strange places where at times we were on the same side of fighting the good fight, but we're in two different places in the same country and didn't know we were working together.
No,
Mugabe
is one of the examples of that, and it was so funny because I remember where I was sitting. I thought whoever came up with this, that's taking pictures. So in that election, the way that they would steal the I'm having a total brain meltdown. What country was Mugabe again?
Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe, exactly. I had Uganda in my head, but in Zimbabwe, right? So they would steal the election at the central counting place. And Joe and his team came up with this idea, unbeknownst to me, that they would take pictures at the local counting stations because they had to put up on blackboards the vote counts. And if everybody took pictures with mobile phones, and it was just kind of, you know, take pictures of mobile phones and send in what was on the board, we would know what the real count was versus. And so I'm sitting where I'm sitting, and I'm thinking, who is organizing this picture? Well, this is like genius. And it turns out years later, Joe and Alex and I were having dinner with a bunch of people, and it came up, and the rest of them spent the entire night listening to Joe and I talking about where we were sitting there, that we had been working together on this thing.
Yeah, it was pretty cool because they were actually flip cams that literally had just been developed at the time. They were like only a few hundred out there. We got them from the factory. And then we factory sealed them in Weet-Bix boxes, cereal boxes, and smuggled them across the South African border into Zimbabwe, and it worked out. But anyway, yeah. So we've been in some trenches together where we were actually in the trench together, like we are now. But we've also literally been in the same fight and didn't realize it till later on.
The thing I wanted to get to with this, and it hit me listening to you guys on Tuesday, and then thinking about some of our recent international experiences. The way that campaigns end up happening in America are pretty formulaic in a lot of ways. I think you fall into it's not just that there's two parties, there's certain tactics. The opposing side says one thing, or somebody says one thing, and they're immediately on one side forever. And there's a lot less fluidity, I think, in a lot of ways in American elections, and especially as you start getting into next year when primary candidates are picked, and then it's, A versus B. But you think about some of the absolutely crazy stuff that has gone down abroad in elections, and how something might shift. The president might call up your guy and say, all of a sudden, when you thought you were about to run a campaign against him, all of a sudden, you're my vice president now, you got to go run the campaign for me. And then the whole calculus totally changes, right? So when thinking about it in the context of Elon, it's not just, okay, he's you don't just roll your eyes and say it's the ketamine or he'll flip on you tomorrow. Trygve, you said it. It's a really valuable tool. And Joe, to your point about the schism, those quotes saying, even Elon Musk hates this budget. Weren't we supposed to drain the swamp? This just does it more, whatever it is. Like, that is actually a serious tool. And it speaks more to the fluidity about how kind of the rest of the world views politics, or has to, I think, because of the game that they already know they're in, than the one we think we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing, though, is, and we talked about this, Trig, on the strategy session, is that the fascinating thing to watch is going to be how this impacts the MAGA members of the House and Senate, because on one hand, a few weeks ago, most of them were being told that if they didn't get in line and vote for this, Elon Musk was going to basically fund the primary challenge to take them out in the primary with somebody who would toe the line and vote for this bill. And now those very same people are being called out by Elon Musk and told, you voted for an abomination. And then I think in a follow-up post, he said that they all needed to be kicked out of the Congress. So, if you're one of those members right now, I think you're sitting there. The dissonance is like rattling around in actual Senate and congressional offices where they don't have which I think gets back to the opportunity here. The more heat we, the people, now put on them, calling those offices, showing up at their local offices, standing in protest, peaceful protest outside their offices or in front of the rural hospital that's about to be shut down because of the Medicaid cuts. All that puts more heat on a suddenly even more discombobulated House and Senate on the MAGA side than there was a week ago.
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing is, if the Trump era has proved one thing to me, it's how much of the Republican consulting / being / DC class is 30 pieces of silver people, right? It really is all about the stature and the money. Elon Musk complicates that because the number of people who were in a good place when Trump and Musk were aligned to profit from that, and who now are facing complicated decisions of which way to go, is substantial, because you now have that exact element that you're talking about, Joe. He spent so much money that those consultants who are aligned with his group, it has the potential to ignite a civil war of epic proportions within the Republican Party. And one of the ways that you beat autocrats is you get their verticals fighting amongst themselves, because they tend to be fairly extremist. That's the opportunity in this. I actually said, I started my Substack, and I actually wrote today about Reagan and Kennedy and Obama and McCain. And one of the points that I made in there is today is a great opportunity for people to reach out and not gloat, but to actually ask the MAGA people they know who are all about Elon, what does this mean? What do you think's going on here? And genuinely be asking the question to get them thinking about the dissonance that exists between what they knew 2 weeks ago and what they know today.
So let's talk a little bit more about the murder budget specifically. And I know we started getting to it last week, but let's look forward now. So
Don't leave out the MAGA part. It's the MAGA murder budget.
The MAGA murder budget, yeah. So what's the best case for Democrats here, guys? Is it if this budget tanks and it's just more Washington gridlock, they weren't able to get something done, or is it pass the budget and then give them something to campaign on or against?
Look, I don't think it's going to – the fact of the matter is they have the Senate, the House, and the presidency, whatever, there's no way Democrats can vote for this thing, period. And I think whatever the outcome is, that something will pass. They're not that crazy to actually, not, sort of run it on no budget and default on and all that stuff, not pay the bills, but to somehow predict what's going to pass doesn't really matter. You can count on the fact that they're going to do the tax cuts and they're going to hurt in seniors, children. And it's just a measure of how deep the cuts are, et cetera, and how they do how big the tax cuts are. But in either way, they're gonna. There's no way to come out of this in any way that doesn't hurt the American people and hurt the future of the country. So I think in that sense, we have to do everything we can to stop it from passing. To stop. To force them to pass something that does the least amount of damage possible, but it's going to do tremendous damage. That's elections do have consequences, and evidently that's going to be one of the ones that we face. That's why it's important now to be loud in terms of putting pressure on, in terms of getting the public to focus on how dangerous this bill is, because when it does pass, they're going to blame it all on Biden or somebody somehow, right? It's not going to be. So we need to get our narrative out there. That's the most important thing. I think that people are starting to hear that. You can see it in the polling.
The thing that, and this is out of the new Navigator research that came out this week, and it kind of gets to the point. The question is, how do voters view it? And I wonder if this is a trap for Democrats. When asked what concerns voters more, Republicans in Congress doing nothing to stop Trump when he goes too far, like tariffs, or if they're actively helping him, voters overwhelmingly chose Republicans in action. So 45% say Republicans have done nothing to stop Trump is more concerning, but only 34% say that them actively helping him. So is this a trap where we end up just campaigning against Trump next year, or is that a good thing?
No, look, I think this is actually a really bad poll question. You think about it. So 45% say that their biggest concern is the Republicans have done nothing to stop him from doing the worst thing that he's doing, and then you add on top of that the 34% who say they've been actively helping him implement these policies. Well, that's 79% of the American people either think the Republicans in Congress are do-nothings who let him keep doing this alarming stuff or are actively helping him. It's the wrong way to ask the question. In other words, so which one is worse? Who knows, right? That's what I think. That's a pretty damning number if you're a member of Congress or the Senate on the MAGA, on the Republican MAGA side of things here, because right now either 45% of Americans think you should be doing something to stop him, and another 34% think that the Republicans in Congress are actively helping him do this. You're not doing either. In other words, everybody's like, laying down or aiding him. And by the way, I think laying down and doing nothing is aiding him, which is something else that we need to make clear. But I think this is just a really bad way to ask this question. It should have been an either or, it should have been asked differently. And I think this is part of the problem, even with a good poll, with good pollsters, that you can just get something that just doesn't, it's interesting, but I'm not sure. And it tells us a lot. I think the 79 number is the biggest, the most important number, which is why this is the moment to strike. It's to be in front of their offices demanding they stop this. And when it passes, they all enabled it and they all helped make it happen. In fact, they'll have to, because there's the only way it's going to pass is if every single Republican member of Congress votes for it.
Don't you think that the real pressure, I think the House is a pressure point on this at the macro level. I think the more interesting game from a political standpoint is the micro level of the Senate, right? Because it's smaller body and you're seeing like the Joni Ernsts of the world struggling to deal with it. In fact, I do Todd Albaugh's radio show, which you guys have been on. Yesterday, we were getting questions about Ernst, Wisconsin and Iowa. And, here's the thing about Joni, right? Like, I know her a little bit. I wouldn't say I know her well, but I know her from back when I was my McConnell sort of world days. I don't understand, I don't understand what's going on there. But what I do know is, it seems to me to be a classic case of crazy begets crazy, right? Like crazy leads to more crazy. And that's what you're seeing. And talk about somebody who was digging a hole and basically said, hand me a shovel. That is where the rubber is going to meet the road in so many ways, is the Tom Tillises, all these guys who are up, even in places like Iowa, that should be fairly straightforward. I think it creates real opportunity in terms of it certainly creates additional vulnerability in some of these Senate races that may not have existed before.
Well, and just looking at the map and the math, Democrats are going to have to get a couple of these. So if you look at it, Iowa, places like Iowa have to be in play. Democrats need the next whatever, if it's a Dan Osborne type or somebody, to come out and really put the fire under them now, so that as the budget process is continuing, you're really starting to put some of these individual, I think the way you put it in micro is right. You put some of these individual senators in a really tough position.
Yeah, you do. And I think the other thing is, and Joe, I love your perspective on this. Years ago when I was starting out in politics, I think it was probably Tommy Thompson who had originally said it. He was saying one time to a bunch of us who were running campaigns, and state senate and other campaigns for him, that he, in his experience, people who lost, it usually wasn't one big thing. It was lots of paper cuts. And I'm not sure that this is the one big thing that takes all those people out. But when you start combining the real world impacts of the budget on people, coupled with the tariffs in a state like Iowa, and who that hurts, coupled with just the broader sort of discomfort that people are having about where things are, that starts to add up. And I think, those are the kinds of things that create vulnerabilities for candidates that keep you up at night when you're consulting for them, far more than one big issue tearing everybody down. Waves are built with lots of small things, I think, rather than one big thing in most cases.
Well, particularly when you're trying to authoritarian space, like you said, it's built on silos. They all have different extreme views on different things, and so anytime it's always about, in that kind of game, chipping off pieces here and pieces there. It's never no no group is going to break away from the autocratic coalition, follows bow to the leader thing, but some people will in each group, and that's what you need. It's almost like, we always talked about the Bannon line, but it's almost like now there's a Bannon line on with farmers, growing with different facts, different silos, and each, you can see it in the discomfort, Joni Ernst being one of them, where get into trouble. They're starting to gaffe. They're starting to make big mistakes. And we're going to need some of that. We needed it in most, some of the big mistakes is they then get into primary wars and nominate even more extreme, MAGA extremists. We saw that in years, where we were able to pick up seats that no one expected us to. I think that may happen this year, but we have to force that. We have to make them, again, worried about what flank which shoulder are they looking over, that worries them about the primary challenge they will get. And I also think, look, at the same time, I think what's happening is a lot of these senators in particular, but I also think a lot of the battleground MAGA members are, who've been up to this point afraid of an even more extreme MAGA primary challenge. With Elon Musk's moving over, with people, I think, with being impacted by the tariffs, being impacted by the continual rise of prices, et cetera, and again, with the effects that are going to happen, closing rural hospitals, those kinds of things. I think what is happening, they're increasingly becoming fearful of what that may. So you've been afraid all this time about what happens in a MAGA primary. You're now becoming very worried about what happens in the general. And what I think has to happen is they have to become more afraid of us in the general than they are of MAGA in the primary. And that's why the Joni Ernst, these little, that's what they're trying to walk that tightrope, and you can't do it. And I think that's what could take them down.
Well, and I think that's why you see some of the crazy, right? Like, people do crazy things when they don't know what to do. And it struck me as Joni was struggling to know what to do, and then you're getting conflicting advice, and that only, behind the scenes, that only makes it worse. I think the other thing about Elon that we should probably talk about a little bit is the bigger picture of that, Joe, from what we've seen around the world, which is, you kind of knew it was going to end this way with Elon and Trump, because it always, in the autocrat versus richest guy in the country getting in bed together, it almost always ends that way. And, it's that great line, the show Billions, the first 3 seasons, I thought was one of the best shows ever on television. But there's a line in there where the political consultant says you can't go to bed with Jenna Jameson or a porn star and think you're going to wake up with Snow White. And that's exactly what Elon Musk did, right? And it always ends like that. I mean, Berezovsky, like you can go to every single one of these countries where you had somebody with autocratic personality disorder, and the rich guy gets in bed with him, enables the rise to power, and then eventually they end up at odds. And this should be a warning sign for all these other tech bro oligarchs that if you try and go to bed with the porn star and think you're going to wake up with Snow White, it ain't going to happen.
Well, I also think, look, that what's going on, we all knew, in that initial period where, Elon was the presidential puppet master over Trump, that, we all were like, how many days can that last, right? I mean, it's just not going to happen. And actually, in a weird way, it's just kind of surprising that he lasted till June. I mean, as long as he has, because it was so obvious that there's no way. Again, going back historically, as you just pointed out, but also just to 2 personalities, there was no way in hell that was going to last. And I'm not so sure about the warning. It's really going to be interesting, I think, because I think the tech bros all along have never really, Trump was just a a means to their end, a vehicle. I think all their chips are really on JD Vance. They've always been on JD Vance. That's why they moved him in to be the VP. And with Elon doing this, you got to wonder, to what extent are they not already fully awake about the need to move on from Trump and put Vance into position, whether it's to, and I'm not getting into conspiracies about them 25 amending Trump. I don't think the Senate or the House has, at least today, has any capacity to even think in those terms. But I do think that we don't underestimate the Trump bros manipulation to basically try to now to take full control from Trump as this, in terms of positioning JD in a way to be the future that they bank on.
I think you're right. I think one of the things that people sometimes miss about sort of autocrats and how they work, right? They build vertical power structures, and those power structures have sort of different factions that they can play off on each other. And it seems to me within Trump world, to some degree, where you're seeing the JD Vance sort of being the representative of the tech bro oligarch class, you also have the Susie Wiles and that sort of more that faction, and then they kind of have Marco Rubio, who it seems that Trump is sort of playing Rubio and Vance against each other, and that really is those different factions. But then what's kind of interesting about it is, he's got other factions. There's the Mike Johnson sort of evangelical faction. There's kind of the libertarian, fourth turning crackpot group. Not that the libertarians are all, I'm pretty libertarian myself, but kind of the fourth turning wing, right? They have a real balancing act. We assume they're monolithic. It's really important in this game that we're in to figure out where can you get those factions beating up and competing with each other.
Yeah, and you're seeing that with Rand Paul, and that there's some schisms there. There's schisms all the way through this thing now, and I think that's again why that's the moment, I think, to try to really put the pressure on.
Yeah, 100%.
You mentioned the Stalin Rule, Trygve. I seem to recall, and I think people, if you haven't seen it, go watch The Death of Stalin. Came out, the comedy came out. But you think about the scramble that happened right in the aftermath of that, and you see this all around the world, like you said, with autocrats when they're starting to be on the edge. You wonder who is going to be the first person to attempt that push with Trump, even obviously while he's still there. But it just feels like that could happen sooner rather than later, and he will bite back hard, whether that'll work or not. But that's another schism. Joe, anything you want to end with?
Trig, tell everybody where they can find you, your new Substack. Give everybody a rundown on where they can hear more from you.
Yeah, so I ended up, as you guys know, I was really hesitant about getting on Substack. But I had to do it because all these people were asking me to do Substack lives, and Substack, in their wisdom, to get people to sign up, says you can't do Substack lives unless you're a part of Substack. So then I was like, well, I need to write. So I'm writing at Searching for Hope is the name of, I think it's at Trygve Olsen, but I'm calling it Searching for Hope. And it really is about the lessons that I've learned about democracy, about, I call it Searching for Hope because my first daughter, who was stillborn at 38 weeks, was named Vilta in Lithuanian, which means hope for the future. So it's sort of an ode to her. I talk about some of those experiences because there aren't a lot of people talking about stillbirth. And so I'm not doing outrage. Every day I give people 3 things, small things they can do to help defend democracy, make the world a little bit better place. And actually today, I haven't sent it out on Blue Sky. You can also find me at Blue Sky. But today I talk about how working with people from NDI, ironically, was one of the best parts. And I one of the things that I do is I suggest that people go back, and I do it in the context of The Shining City on a Hill. I ask people to go back and watch Reagan's farewell speech, watch Kennedy's Ask Not What You Can Do for Your Country, his inauguration speech, John McCain's concession speech, and Barack Obama's eulogy at McCain's funeral, and remind themselves what leadership and character and what America has been, and why the fact that it's being torn down is so bad. So hopefully, so far so good. People seem to be responding to it. It's free. It will always be free. I don't feel like writing about my experiences with those who, literally are risking their lives, and some who gave their lives for the cause of democracy in their country, is something that should be for profit for me. I think those lessons of people like Boris Nemtsov should be ones that everybody can have. So I hope people will sign up.
Yeah, look, you don't need to apologize for Substack. I mean, I understand the problems look, no one has said more about the problems with all the existing social networks and platforms out there than I have. But I continue to urge people to stay on X, stay on Blue Sky, stay on Substack. I mean, I have a Substack as well. And obviously Lincoln Square's there, because you got to read, that's where the millions of people are. And we're trying to reach people and try to get them information, what they can do, what they need to be worried about, how can they sound the alarm, how do they know they're not alone, and that there's that there are voices out there that they can listen to. So, I have Trippi Take, my Substack, and then obviously Lincoln Square Substack, or both things. But there's Ghost, there's other platforms.
Says Us. I always posted it on Says Us. The one thing I say this to give people some hope, quite frankly. One of the things that I have found most heartening about it, I keep my Facebook and is all personal. I only friend people from high school or whatever. I don't do strangers. But I did put my Substack up that I was going to be writing about stuff on Facebook. And, on Substack, you can see who's reading it. The number of people from my high school and back home who I've never thought would be interested in politics, who are reading everything I write, makes me feel really good, because I know a lot of those people are people who are experiencing the dissonance. A lot of them voted for Trump. And we are the majority. The number of people who are uncomfortable with this is substantial. And so that's really my audience. But I hope that, regardless of what you're looking for, I think you'll find some useful stuff in there. You just, it's going to be more esoteric.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. We need to use the platforms where it's the same thing. You have to go where people are. Now, what I say is, at the same time, we need to build our own networks and media outlets. And that's why Says Us is so important, I think, because it's a civil social network for real human beings. I wrote a piece about that, about why, basically all these social networks are sort of flattening out our thinking. It's all binary, like, dislike, follow, unfollow, red, blue. There's no nuance, nothing in between. And so, a civil social network for real human beings is what we need to create, where you can disagree civilly, make arguments, talk about policy without getting yelled at, and maybe actually find some common purpose, because that's not what the binary, you got this purpose or that purpose. There can't be all of us with the same. So anyway, I would urge everybody to join us. It Says Us. SEZ.us. It's in your app stores, Google and Apple. And as Trygve said, this podcast will always be free and is part of Lincoln Square. Check out the latest at lincolnsquare.media. The one thing I would say is, look, a lot of people at Lincoln Square here, a lot of the Courier and other places that are trying to build sort of some faith in truth, some place where we can find some commonality and talk. They're putting a lot of time and effort into it. If you can, you should subscribe and chip in a little to keep them going. So I think that's right. This podcast will always be free. But when you see people out there and you like their content and they're writing things that you're consuming, trust me, the platforms are not helping those people out a whole lot and taking a bulk of the money. So anyway, thanks for being with us. Thanks, Trygve. Really appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for listening.